My wife doesn't want you to live here. Go to a nursing home or find another place." The words exploded from my son's mouth like shrapnel, each one embedding deeper than the last. Daniel stood there in the living room of the Burlington, Vermont home where I'd lived for the past 3 years, his face flushed with a combination of anger and shame. The bitter January wind rattled the windows, but it couldn't compare to the chill that settled in my bones as I realized my own child was evicting me at 71 years old. I gripped the arms of my chair, the same one I'd shipped from our old family home when I'd sold it to move in with Daniel after his father died. My arthritis flared with the pressure, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the knife twisting in my heart. "Daniel, this is sudden." I managed to keep my voice steady, decades of teaching high school English serving me well in maintaining composure when I wanted to crumble. I thought Vanessa and I were getting along better these days. My son's eyes, so like his father's, couldn't meet mine. "She's pregnant, Mom. We need the space for the nursery." Behind him, I caught a glimpse of my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, hovering in the doorway, her slender figure showing no signs of the pregnancy she claimed, her perfectly manicured hand resting protectively over her flat stomach. The slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth told me everything I needed to know. This had been her plan all along. For 3 years, I'd tried to make myself useful, cooking family meals, tending to the garden that had become the envy of the neighborhood, watching their dog when they traveled. I'd emptied my savings to help with the down payment on this house when Daniel had been laid off from his accounting job, believing his promise that this would be my forever home too. I'd tolerated Vanessa's subtle jabs, her rearranging my belongings, her forgetting to include me in family dinner plans. But I never thought it would come to this. "I gave you $30,000 for the down payment on this house," I said quietly, the words hanging in the air between us. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "That was a gift, Mom. You said so yourself." His voice had that defensive edge I'd heard more frequently since he married Vanessa 5 years ago. "Besides, we can help you find a nice retirement community. There's one just outside of town that has activities and—" "On what? My Social Security?" The bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "After helping you with this house, I have less than $15,000 in savings left." "You should have planned better for retirement," Vanessa interjected, finally stepping fully into the room. She was wearing one of her expensive cashmere sweaters, bought with money from a job she'd mysteriously left 6 months ago. "My mother has a lovely condo in a senior living facility. Of course, she saved properly." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. Vanessa's mother had remarried a wealthy businessman and lived in Florida, a fact she conveniently omitted. My late husband James had been a high school science teacher, and I'd taught English. We'd saved what we could, but medical bills from James's long battle with cancer had depleted most of our retirement funds. Daniel knew this. He had been there through it all, holding his father's hand in those final moments. "How long do I have?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to start converting your room by the end of the month," Daniel replied, still not meeting my eyes. "The baby will be here in August, and we need time to prepare." January to August. 7 months. Yet they needed my room by the end of the month. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to find a new place to live in the middle of a Vermont winter with limited funds and nowhere to go. "I see." I rose from my chair, my knees protesting the sudden movement. At 71, I was still relatively healthy, my silver hair cut in a practical bob, my body thin but strong from years of gardening and walking. I stood straight, refusing to let them see me bend. "I'll start looking for a place tomorrow." "Mom," Daniel began, but I held up my hand. "Not now, Daniel. I need some time." I walked past them both, my head high despite the tears threatening to spill. I caught Vanessa's satisfied expression as I passed, and something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about space for a nursery. This was about removing me from their lives completely. In my room, soon to be their nursery, I sat heavily on the edge of my bed. Photos of a lifetime surrounded me. James and I on our wedding day in 1974. Daniel's birth in 1982. Family vacations, graduations, the day Daniel met Vanessa at a colleague's wedding 6 years ago. The slow progression of James's illness, his body wasting away while his mind remained sharp until the very end. "Oh, James," I whispered to the empty room, picking up our wedding photo. "What am I going to do now?" My finger traced his smiling face, remembering how he'd always said I was the strong one. "Margaret Hale, you've got more steel in your spine than anyone I've ever met," he'd told me once, when we'd faced foreclosure during the recession of the early 90s. I'd taken on 3 extra jobs until we caught up on payments, teaching during the day, tutoring in the evenings, and working weekends at the local bookstore. That steel would need to serve me now. I pulled my laptop from the bedside table, a gift from Daniel 2 Christmases ago, and began searching for affordable apartments in Burlington. The prices made my heart sink. Even the smallest studio apartments were far beyond what my Social Security check could cover for more than a few months. Retirement communities required substantial down payments and monthly fees that would quickly deplete my remaining savings. As night fell and the house grew quiet, I heard Daniel and Vanessa's muffled voices from their bedroom down the hall. Her tone was insistent, his placating. The pattern had become familiar over the years. Vanessa wanted something, and Daniel inevitably gave in. I wondered if he even realized how much he'd changed since marrying her, how he'd gradually distanced himself from old friends, from hobbies he once loved, from me. My phone buzzed with a text message, startling me. It was from Eleanor, my closest friend since we'd taught together at Burlington High for nearly 30 years. "How did it go with Daniel today? Did you tell him about the letter?" The letter. In all the shock of being told to leave, I'd completely forgotten about the certified mail that had arrived yesterday. I reached for my purse and pulled out the envelope I'd stashed there, still unopened. The return address was from a law firm in Manchester, New Hampshire, Whitmore and Associates. I didn't know anyone in Manchester, and certainly no lawyers. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the formal letter inside. "Dear Mrs. Margaret Hale," it began. "I am writing regarding the estate of your late sister, Evelyn Hale. Recent developments have come to our attention that require your immediate presence at our offices. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to schedule an appointment regarding matters of significant financial importance." It was signed by Richard Whitmore, attorney at law, with a phone number and email address below. My sister Evelyn? She had died 15 years ago in a car accident. We hadn't been close since a falling out decades earlier, and I hadn't received anything from her estate at the time. What could possibly have changed now? I read the letter again, noticing the urgency in its tone. Matters of significant financial importance. What did that mean? I checked the time, just past 9 p.m., too late to call the law office. But perhaps I picked up my phone and dialed Eleanor's number. "Margaret?" she answered immediately. "What did Daniel say?" "They're kicking me out," I said bluntly, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "Vanessa's supposedly pregnant, and they need my room for a nursery." That manipulative little... Eleanor's voice rose with indignation. "Are you okay? Do you need to come stay with me?" "I might take you up on that temporarily," I admitted. "But I just opened that letter. It's from a law firm in Manchester about Evelyn's estate. They want me to come in as soon as possible about matters of significant financial importance." "Evelyn? But she's been gone for 15 years. Eleanor had known about my estrangement from my younger sister, how we'd drifted apart after she'd moved away from Vermont in her 20s, settling in New Hampshire and rarely contacting the family. By the time she died at 56, we were practically strangers. "I know. It doesn't make sense." I stared at the letter. "But I'm going to call them tomorrow. At this point, I need any help I can get. Do you want me to drive you to Manchester when you get an appointment? It's only about 3 hours from here." Eleanor's kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." After we hung up, I sat in the dim light of my bedside lamp, mind racing. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the same day I learned I was about to be homeless, a mysterious letter about my estranged sister's estate appeared. If I were the superstitious type, I might have seen Evelyn's hand in this from beyond the grave. I tucked the letter carefully into my purse and began making a mental inventory of my possessions. I didn't own much. Clothes, books, a few pieces of jewelry, my laptop, and the family photos I treasured. Most of our furniture had been sold when I moved in with Daniel. What I couldn't take with me would have to be stored somewhere, another expense I couldn't afford. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, listening to the house creak and settle in the cold, thinking about how quickly life could change. Yesterday, I'd been secure in the belief that I had a home, that despite Vanessa's coldness, my son would always look out for me. Today, I was scrambling to find affordable housing in one of the most expensive cities in Vermont in the dead of winter. But there was also the letter, a mystery, a possibility, perhaps even a lifeline. As dawn broke over the snow-covered yard, I made a decision. Before I started apartment hunting, before I told anyone else about being evicted from my son's home, I would drive to Manchester with Eleanor and find out what Richard Whitmore had to tell me about my sister's estate. Something told me that this wasn't a coincidence, that somehow Evelyn was reaching out to me when I needed help the most. I got up and dressed warmly, pulling on a thick sweater and wool pants. In the kitchen, I made coffee and toast, sitting alone at the table as I'd done most mornings since moving in. Daniel and Vanessa rarely woke before 8 a.m., giving me these peaceful morning hours to myself. I called the number on the letter precisely at 9 a.m. when I assumed the office would open. "Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call?" a pleasant female voice answered. "This is Margaret Hale. I received a letter from Richard Whitmore regarding my sister Evelyn's estate." There was a pause, and I heard keyboard clicking. "Yes, Mrs. Hale, Mr. Whitmore has been expecting your call. Would you be able to come to our Manchester office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Tomorrow. That was quick. Yes, that would be fine. Excellent. Mr. Whitmore will see you then. Do you need directions to our office? After writing down the address and thanking her, I hung up and immediately called Eleanor. They want to see me tomorrow morning, I told her. Can you still drive me? Of course, Eleanor replied without hesitation. I'll pick you up at 6:30 a.m. We'll need to leave early to account for traffic and weather. With that settled, I took a deep breath and prepared to face the day and whatever revelation awaited me in Manchester. Little did I know that the contents of Evelyn's mysterious estate would change everything. Not just for me, but for Daniel and Vanessa as well. My sister, it seemed, had one final surprise in store. One that would expose truths long hidden and set in motion a reckoning 15 years in the making. The drive to Manchester was mostly silent. Eleanor, bless her heart, seemed to understand my need to process everything. The landscape passed by in a blur of white-covered fields and skeletal trees, Vermont's winter beauty unable to penetrate my troubled thoughts. Occasionally, she would reach over and pat my hand reassuringly, her touch a small comfort in the storm of uncertainty. Are you nervous? She finally asked as we crossed the state line into New Hampshire, the morning sun casting long shadows across the highway. Terrified, I admitted, watching my breath fog in the car's warmth. I have no idea what to expect. Evelyn and we weren't close at the end. That was putting it mildly. My relationship with my younger sister had fractured decades ago over what now seemed like trivial matters. Her impulsive decision to drop out of college, her whirlwind marriage to a man none of us knew, her gradual withdrawal from family gatherings. The final break came when she missed our mother's funeral, offering no explanation beyond a terse note of condolence. After that, our communication dwindled to Christmas cards and occasional phone calls that grew more awkward each year. By the time I received news of her death in a car accident 15 years ago, she had become almost a stranger. I attended her small funeral in Manchester, but there had been no mention of a will or inheritance. Her husband Thomas had died 2 years before her, and they had no children. I assumed whatever modest assets she had were distributed or claimed by the state long ago. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together, Eleanor said firmly, navigating through Manchester's morning traffic. The city was larger than Burlington, with a distinctly industrial feel despite recent revitalization efforts. Whitmore and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated mill building downtown, its brick exterior and large windows speaking to its 19th century origins. The reception area was tastefully appointed with dark wood furniture and muted green walls that gave it an air of established respectability. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with a kind smile, greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Hale? Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. May I take your coats?" 10 minutes later, we were seated across from Richard Whitmore, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law books and framed credentials, a large window behind his desk overlooking the Merrimack River. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of a former smoker. "And you are," he directed at Eleanor. "Eleanor Kavanagh, my closest friend," I explained. Given the circumstances in my personal life right now, I asked her to accompany me. He nodded, seeming to accept this without question. "Before we begin, I must verify your identity." He slid a form across the desk. "If you could please provide your identification and sign here." After checking my driver's license and confirming the signature, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Hale, what I'm about to share with you may come as quite a shock. Are you prepared for that?" My stomach tightened. "As much as I can be, yes." Whitmore nodded and opened a thick file folder on his desk. 15 years ago, your sister Evelyn Hale came to me to draft her will. She was in perfect health at the time, but said she had, and I quote, a feeling that she should put her affairs in order. He adjusted his glasses. "In that will, she named you as her sole beneficiary." I blinked, confusion washing over me. "But I never received any notification. There was no inheritance." "That's precisely why we're here today." His expression darkened. "Your sister's estate was substantial, Mrs. Hale. She had made several shrewd investments in tech companies in the late 90s and early 2000s. Additionally, she owned a 20-acre farm property outside Manchester and had considerable savings." My mind reeled. Evelyn, wealthy. She had always lived modestly from what little I knew. The small, simple funeral certainly hadn't suggested affluence. The total value of her estate at the time of her death was approximately $875,000. Whitmore continued. I gasped, and Eleanor's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "As executor of her will, I sent multiple notices to your address in Burlington after her death." He pulled several papers from the file. "All of these were returned as addressee unknown or no such person at this address. After exhausting all reasonable efforts to locate you, the estate was placed in trust, as per Evelyn's instructions, in case you couldn't be found immediately." "But that's impossible," I protested. "I lived in the same house in Burlington for over 40 years until 3 years ago when I moved in with my son." Whitmore frowned. "What was your address at that time?" I told him, and he checked his records, nodding slowly. "That's exactly where we sent the notices." He looked troubled. "Mrs. Hale, did anyone else have access to your mail during that period?" The question hung in the air for a moment before the implications hit me. My son Daniel and his wife Vanessa moved in with me for about 8 months after Evelyn died. James, my husband, was already quite ill with cancer, and they came to help. My voice faltered as pieces began falling into place. Vanessa often collected the mail while I was at the hospital with James. Whitmore's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the flicker of comprehension in his eyes. "I see. But why contact me now, after 15 years?" I asked, still struggling to process everything. He pulled a sealed envelope from the file. 2 months ago, we received this in the mail. It was addressed to me, but marked as only to be opened in your presence." He handed it to me. "The return address is a storage facility here in Manchester." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and extracted a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Evelyn's, the same elegant script that had adorned her infrequent letters and cards over the years. "Dear Maggie," it began, using the childhood nickname only she had ever called me. "If you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and my final request has been activated. I arranged for this letter to be held in storage and automatically sent to Mr. Whitmore. If the storage unit rent wasn't paid for 3 consecutive months, something that would only happen if I were no longer alive, I have a confession that may surprise you. Despite our estrangement, I've kept tabs on you and your family over the years. I know about James's cancer diagnosis, about Daniel's marriage to Vanessa Crowley, and about my own impending death. Yes, you read that correctly. By the time you receive this, I will have been gone for many years, but my death was not the accident everyone believes it to be. 3 months before the car crash, I was diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor. Rather than suffer a prolonged and undignified end, I chose my own exit strategy, making it appear accidental for insurance purposes. But that's not why I'm writing. During my research into Vanessa's background, I discovered disturbing information. She has a history of targeting vulnerable families, insinuating herself into their lives, and eventually taking financial control. Her real name is Vanessa Crowley Jenkins, and she has been married twice before meeting Daniel. Both marriages ended after she drained her husband's bank accounts. I fear that by the time you read this, she will have done the same to Daniel, and possibly to you. That's why I set up my will the way I did, with you as the sole beneficiary, but with a fail-safe mechanism in place. If my notices went unanswered, as I suspected they might if Vanessa intercepted them, the estate would be held in trust, accumulating interest until you were found. Mr. Whitmore has all the documentation you need regarding my estate and evidence about Vanessa's past. Use it wisely, Maggie. Protect yourself and Daniel. I'm sorry we grew apart. In my final months, I realized how foolish our estrangement was. This is my attempt to make amends and to help you from beyond the grave. With love always, your sister, Evelyn. The letter trembled in my hands as tears blurred my vision. Eleanor read over my shoulder, her sharp intake of breath telling me she'd reached the revelations about Vanessa. Mrs. Hale. Whitmore's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I carefully folded the letter, taking a moment to compose myself. My sister knew she was dying. She arranged all of this to protect me from Vanessa. I looked up at Whitmore. She said you have evidence? Yes. Whitmore nodded solemnly, pulling another file from his desk. Over the past 15 years, your sister's estate has grown considerably. The investments continue to perform well, and the farm property has appreciated in value. With accumulated interest and market growth, the current value is approximately $1.9 million. The room seemed to spin around me. Nearly $2 million. The amount was unfathomable. In addition, Whitmore continued, we have these. He spread several documents across the desk. Background checks on Vanessa Crowley Jenkins, marriage and divorce records, police reports for fraud allegations that were settled out of court, and bank records showing suspicious patterns of behavior. I leaned forward, examining a marriage certificate. Vanessa Jenkins to Robert Crowley, dated 12 years ago. Another divorce decree from 9 years ago. A third document showed a restraining order filed against her by an elderly woman named Helen Prescott, claiming financial exploitation. The pieces of Vanessa's past formed a disturbing mosaic. This is overwhelming, I said finally, leaning back in my chair. But it explains so much. The way she isolated Daniel from his friends, from me, how she always seemed to be monitoring his finances, insisting on joint accounts. There's more, Whitmore said, his expression grave. Yesterday, after confirming your appointment, I took the liberty of checking county records. Your son's house, the one you mentioned contributing to, has a second mortgage taken out 6 months ago for $150,000. It's signed by both Daniel and Vanessa. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. But that's impossible. Daniel would have told me, even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The Daniel who would have told me everything had gradually disappeared over the 5 years of his marriage, replaced by a man who jumped at his wife's commands and kept secrets from his mother. What do we do now? Eleanor asked, always the practical one. Whitmore leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic to businesslike. That depends on what Mrs. Hale wants. We can proceed immediately with the transfer of assets. The farm property would require some paperwork, but the liquid assets, approximately $1.2 million, could be transferred to your account within days. And the evidence against Vanessa? I asked, my mind racing with implications. That's more complicated, he admitted. None of this is recent enough to bring criminal charges, especially since the victim settled privately. However, he paused, considering his words carefully. It could be very persuasive in certain contexts. I understood his meaning immediately. Leverage. Information that could destroy Vanessa's carefully constructed facade. I need time to think, I said, overwhelmed by the morning's revelations. Of course, Whitmore replied, but there is one more thing you should know. He pulled a final document from the file. Evelyn left specific instructions about the farm. It can't be sold. It must remain in the family or be converted into a non-profit entity. She was quite adamant about this. I nodded, still processing. Everything. May I see it? The farm? Certainly. It's about 20 minutes from here. I can have my assistant provide directions. An hour later, Eleanor and I drove slowly down a snow-covered private road, tall pines lining the way like sentinels. The GPS announced our arrival as we rounded a bend, and I gasped at the sight before us. It wasn't a farm in the traditional sense of vast open fields. Instead, a charming two-story farmhouse, painted a warm yellow, stood proudly amid several acres of cleared land, the rest seemingly wooded. A large barn and a smaller outbuilding were visible behind the house, and despite the winter barrenness, I could imagine how beautiful it must be in spring and summer. "It's lovely," Eleanor murmured as we parked in front of the house. Whitmore had provided a key, explaining that the property had been maintained by a local service all these years, kept clean and functional, though unoccupied. With trepidation, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The interior was like stepping back in time. Not in a dilapidated way, but in its vintage charm. Hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, built-in bookshelves filled with volumes that must have been Evelyn's. The furniture was covered with white sheets, giving the rooms a ghostly appearance, but I could see quality pieces beneath: a leather sofa, solid oak dining table, antique side tables. Moving through the house felt like getting to know my sister all over again. Her taste in art, landscapes and abstract pieces, her collection of vinyl records, her kitchen with high-end appliances that suggested she enjoyed cooking. A small office revealed a desk with a view of the backyard and woods beyond, bookshelves lined with volumes on investing, gardening, and philosophy. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms completed the living space. The master bedroom featured a bay window with a window seat, currently looking out over a snow-covered garden area. "She lived well," Eleanor observed, running her hand over a walnut dresser. "Yes, she did." I sat on the edge of the bed, emotions washing over me. Grief for the relationship we never repaired in life, gratitude for her posthumous protection, and a growing anger at Vanessa for intercepting what might have saved me years of financial struggle. "You could live here," Eleanor said quietly, joining me on the bed. "It's a beautiful home, Margaret, and it's yours." The realization dawned slowly. This house, this lovely, secluded farmhouse, was mine. No more cramped room in Daniel's house, no more walking on eggshells around Vanessa, no more feeling like an unwelcome guest. I had a home of my own again, and the financial means to maintain it. But what about Daniel? My son was married to a woman who had deliberately hidden my inheritance, who had a history of exploitation, who was now apparently taking out secret loans against their house. Could I simply take my newfound wealth and abandon him to her manipulations? "I need to confront them," I said, my resolve hardening. "Not just for myself, but for Daniel. He needs to know who he's really married to." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "What's your plan?" I took a deep breath, ideas forming. "First, I need to secure my inheritance legally. Then, I want Mr. Whitmore to arrange a formal reading of Evelyn's will, with Daniel and Vanessa present. Do you think that's wise? Vanessa could react unpredictably if cornered. That's precisely why it needs to be in a formal setting, with witnesses and a lawyer present," I explained, a strategy taking shape in my mind. "No screaming, no denials, just facts laid out clearly, where she can't manipulate or twist the narrative." We explored the rest of the property before leaving. The barn that had been converted into a workshop space, the smaller building that served as a guest cottage, the expanse of woods that provided complete privacy from neighbors. With each discovery, I felt more connected to Evelyn and more determined to honor her final gift by using it wisely. On the drive back to Burlington, Eleanor and I discussed practical matters: how quickly I could move, what furniture I would need, the logistics of living 20 minutes outside Manchester rather than in Burlington. I called Whitmore from the road, authorizing him to begin the transfer process and to arrange the formal will reading for Friday afternoon, just 3 days away. "What will you tell Daniel when you get home?" Eleanor asked as we neared Burlington, the sun beginning to set over the snowy landscape. "Nothing yet," I decided. "I'll simply say I visited an old friend in Manchester. I don't want to give Vanessa any warning of what's coming." Eleanor dropped me off at Daniel's house around 6:30 p.m. The lights were on, and both cars were in the driveway, indicating everyone was home. I took a steadying breath before entering, my mind still reeling from the day's revelations, but determined to maintain my composure for a few more days. The smell of takeout Chinese food greeted me as I entered, a Friday tradition in our household. In the dining room, Daniel and Vanessa were already eating, not having waited for my return. "There you are," Daniel said, looking up briefly. "We weren't sure when you'd be back, so we started without you. There's plenty left in the kitchen." "Thank you," I said, hanging up my coat and scarf. "Sorry I was gone all day. It was lovely catching up with old friends." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Friends in Manchester? I didn't know you knew anyone there." The casual way she probed for information sent a chill down my spine. Had she always been this transparent, or was I just seeing her clearly for the first time? "Oh, you'd be surprised who you run into at teacher conferences over the years," I replied vaguely, heading to the kitchen to fix myself a plate. "How was your day? Any luck with the nursery planning?" The irony of asking about the very room they were evicting me to create wasn't lost on me, but I maintained an innocent expression as I returned to the table. "Actually, we've been looking at paint samples," Vanessa said, her enthusiasm seeming forced. "I'm thinking a pale green, gender neutral, you know." I nodded, taking a bite of lo mein to avoid responding. The pregnancy lie was particularly cruel now that I knew the truth. Was there even a plan for a nursery? Or was it simply the most convenient excuse to get rid of me? "When do you think you'll start looking at places?" Daniel asked, not meeting my eyes. "We could help you check out some of those retirement communities this weekend if you want." "Actually, I have plans on Friday afternoon," I said casually. "But perhaps we could all sit down together on Friday evening to discuss my living situation. I might have some options to consider by then." Daniel looked relieved that I wasn't putting up a fight. "Sure, that sounds good." Vanessa was watching me carefully, a slight furrow between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. Something in my demeanor must have alerted her that something had changed. "What kind of plans do you have on Friday?" "Just a meeting," I said, deliberately vague. "Nothing exciting." The conversation drifted to other topics. Daniel's work, a show Vanessa was watching, mundane matters that seemed surreal given what I now knew. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue from the long drive, and retreated to my room. Sitting on my bed, I pulled out Evelyn's letter again, reading it slowly, absorbing every word. My sister had been watching over me all this time, had seen the danger Vanessa posed before any of us, and had created this elaborate safety net. The tragedy was that her protection had been delayed by 15 years due to the very person she was trying to shield me from. I opened my laptop and checked my email. Whitmore had already sent several documents requiring electronic signatures to begin the inheritance process. I signed them one by one, each click bringing me closer to financial independence and the power to potentially save my son from the web Vanessa had woven around him. As I prepared for bed, I heard Daniel and Vanessa's voices rise in the living room, their words indistinct, but the tension clear. Were they arguing about me? About money? About this fictional baby that was supposedly on the way? I closed my eyes, thinking of the yellow farmhouse waiting for me in New Hampshire. For the first time since James died, I felt a sense of hope for the future, not just for myself, but perhaps for Daniel too. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. I went through the motions of daily life, making breakfast, reading in the living room, taking short walks around the neighborhood despite the cold, all while carrying the weight of my newfound knowledge. Every interaction with Vanessa took on new meaning, her casual questions about my plans now transparent attempts to gather information. Every time Daniel avoided my gaze, I wondered if he truly believed in this pregnancy, or if, on some level, he knew it was another of his wife's manipulations. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Richard Whitmore confirming our appointment for the will reading. "Everything is arranged for tomorrow at 2:00 p.m., he said, his professional tone reassuring. "I've prepared all the necessary documentation and secured a conference room. Will you be bringing your son and his wife as discussed?" "Yes," I replied, glancing around to ensure I was alone in the house. "But they don't know the purpose of the meeting yet. I'll tell them tonight." There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Hale, I must advise you that surprising them this way could create a volatile situation. Have you considered simply informing your son privately?" I had considered it, turning the option over in my mind repeatedly. But I knew Daniel too well. He would tell Vanessa immediately, giving her time to craft explanations, or worse, to disappear with whatever remained of their finances. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Whitmore, but I believe this is the best approach. Vanessa needs to be confronted with the evidence directly in a controlled environment. Very well, he conceded. I should also inform you that the initial funds transfer has been completed. $1 million has been deposited into the new account we established for you. The remaining liquid assets will follow next week, and the property transfer paperwork is being processed. The sum still seemed unreal to me. A teacher's salary had never prepared me for thinking in millions. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow at 2. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, mentally rehearsing what I would say to Daniel and Vanessa that evening. The conversation I was dreading would change everything, but it couldn't be avoided. They arrived home together around 6, Vanessa carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques. Retail therapy had always been her response to stress, and I wondered fleetingly if the second mortgage was funding her shopping habits. Daniel, Vanessa, I said as they entered, my voice steadier than I expected. Could we talk for a moment? Daniel looked wary, setting down his laptop bag. Is this about finding a place? Because we can definitely help this weekend. No, it's about an appointment I have tomorrow in Manchester, I interrupted, watching Vanessa's expression carefully. I'd like both of you to come with me. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. Manchester. Again? What kind of appointment requires us to drive 3 hours? It's with a lawyer, I said simply. Richard Whitmore of Whitmore and Associates. It concerns my sister Evelyn's estate. The flash of alarm in Vanessa's eyes was unmistakable and deeply satisfying. She recovered quickly, her face resuming its mask of polite interest, but that momentary slip told me everything. She knew exactly who Richard Whitmore was. Your sister? The one who died years ago? Daniel looked confused. What could possibly... That's what we'll find out tomorrow, I cut in smoothly. The appointment is at 2 o'clock. I'd really appreciate if you both could come. It sounds important. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow afternoon, Vanessa said quickly, for the baby. I can't miss it. Reschedule it, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Family comes first, doesn't it? Especially when it might involve an inheritance. The word inheritance had the desired effect. Daniel's expression shifted from reluctance to interest, and even Vanessa couldn't maintain her objection in the face of potential money. I suppose I could move my appointment, she conceded, her voice tight. What time would we need to leave? Around 10:30, I said. I'll drive if you'd prefer. No need, Daniel interjected. We can take our car. The evening passed in strained politeness. Vanessa disappeared into their bedroom early, claiming pregnancy fatigue, while Daniel and I watched TV in uncomfortable silence. Around 9, he finally spoke. Mom, is everything okay? You've been different since your trip to Manchester. I looked at my son, really looked at him, seeing not just the man he was now, but the boy he had been. The child who built elaborate Lego structures and insisted on reading just one more chapter at bedtime. The teenager who protested against environmental injustice and volunteered at animal shelters. The young man who sat vigil with me during his father's final days. Both of us holding James's hands as he slipped away. When had that person started to disappear? When had Vanessa's influence begun to override the values James and I had instilled in him? Everything will make sense tomorrow, I said gently. Just keep an open mind, okay? He looked troubled, but nodded, and shortly after, we both retired to our rooms. Sleep was elusive that night. I lay awake, mind racing with scenarios for the next day. Would Vanessa break down and confess when confronted with the evidence? Would she become aggressive? Would Daniel believe the truth about the woman he married? Or would his loyalty to her override the facts? Morning arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and temperatures well below freezing. The weather matched the frosty atmosphere in the house as we prepared for the drive. Vanessa was unusually quiet, her face betraying the calculation happening behind her carefully applied makeup. Daniel seemed oblivious to the tension, chatting about road conditions and stopping for coffee. The drive to Manchester felt twice as long as it had with Eleanor. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat beside Daniel, occasionally checking her phone with deliberate casualness. I wondered if she was researching Richard Whitmore, trying to determine exactly how much trouble she was in. We arrived at the law office 20 minutes early. The receptionist greeted me warmly, like an old friend. "Mrs. Hale, welcome back. Mr. Whitmore is ready for you whenever you're all set." "Thank you, Linda," I replied, noting Vanessa's sideways glance at my familiar exchange. "We'll just hang up our coats." The conference room was impressive, a long mahogany table surrounded by comfortable leather chairs, art adorning the walls, a credenza with water and coffee service along one side. Richard Whitmore stood as we entered, extending his hand first to me, then to Daniel and Vanessa. "Mrs. Hale, good to see you again, and you must be Daniel," he said, shaking my son's hand firmly. His gaze shifted to Vanessa, his expression remaining professionally neutral despite what he knew about her. "And Mrs. Hale, I presume?" "Yes," Vanessa replied, her voice higher than usual. "Vanessa Hale. Please have a seat." Whitmore gestured to the chairs. "Before we begin, I should explain why we're here." As we settled around the table, I noticed a young woman I hadn't seen before, sitting quietly in the corner with a laptop. Whitmore caught my questioning look. "This is Ms. Jenkins, my paralegal. She'll be taking notes of our meeting if that's acceptable to everyone." Daniel nodded, clearly confused but polite. Vanessa's eyes narrowed at the paralegal, perhaps recognizing the unusual precaution this represented. I simply nodded my agreement, relieved to have another witness to what was about to unfold. "Now then," Whitmore began, opening a file folder. "We are here regarding the last will and testament of Evelyn Marie Hale, who passed away 15 years ago. Mrs. Margaret Hale is the sole beneficiary of this estate, which includes a 20-acre property outside Manchester and liquid assets currently valued at approximately $1.9 million. Daniel's jaw dropped. Vanessa went very still, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the arms of her chair. "I don't understand," Daniel said, looking between Whitmore and me. "If Mom inherited all this 15 years ago, why are we just hearing about it now?" Whitmore's expression was grave. "That's precisely the question that brought us here today, Mr. Hale. Following Ms. Hale's death, our office sent multiple notices to your mother's address in Burlington. All were returned as undeliverable or addressee unknown. After exhausting all reasonable efforts to locate Mrs. Hale, the estate was placed in trust, as per Evelyn Hale's instructions." "But that's impossible," Daniel protested. "Mom lived at the same address for decades until she moved in with us 3 years ago. She should have received those notices." "Indeed she should have," Whitmore agreed, his gaze shifting deliberately to Vanessa. "Mrs. Hale, do you recall living with your mother-in-law shortly after Evelyn Hale's death?" Vanessa's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "Briefly, yes, while Daniel's father was ill." "And during that time, did you ever happen to collect the mail for the household?" The direct question hung in the air. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, settling briefly on the paralegal typing quietly in the corner, then back to Whitmore. "Sometimes," she said cautiously. "Daniel's father was in the hospital, and his mother was often there. With him, I tried to help with household tasks." "I see." Whitmore's tone remained conversational, but his eyes were sharp. "And during that time, did you ever receive certified letters addressed to Margaret Hale from this law firm?" "I don't recall any specific letters," Vanessa replied, a slight tremor in her voice. "It was a difficult time for everyone." Whitmore nodded as if considering this, then extracted several documents from his folder. "Mrs. Hale, Vanessa, perhaps these might refresh your memory." He slid photocopies across the table, return receipts for certified mail, each bearing what appeared to be Vanessa's signature. Daniel leaned forward, examining the papers with growing confusion. "These are your signatures, Vanessa. You signed for these letters." I must have forgotten," she stammered, color rising in her cheeks. "There was so much going on with James's illness." "Let me be clear," Whitmore interrupted, his voice hardening. "We sent 6 certified letters over a period of 8 months. All were signed for, none were acknowledged. This represents a deliberate pattern of interception, not a simple oversight." Daniel turned to his wife, bewilderment and the first hints of suspicion dawning in his expression. "Vanessa, what is he talking about? Did you hide these letters from Mom?" Before she could answer, Whitmore continued. "Additionally, we have evidence suggesting this behavior fits a larger pattern." He produced another folder. Vanessa Jenkins Crowley, has a history of similar actions in previous relationships. The use of her full former name hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She recoiled, her composure finally cracking completely. You have no right to discuss my past. That's private information. Not when it establishes a pattern of fraudulent behavior, Whitmore countered calmly. Especially when that behavior has deprived my client of her rightful inheritance for 15 years. Daniel looked shell-shocked, his gaze moving between his wife and the lawyer. Previous relationships? Jenkins Crowley? Vanessa? What is going on? I placed my hand on Daniel's arm. Son, there's more you need to know. Over the next 30 minutes, Whitmore methodically presented the evidence Evelyn had gathered. Vanessa's previous marriages and financial improprieties, the restraining order, the pattern of targeting vulnerable families. With each revelation, Daniel seemed to physically shrink, his shoulders hunching as if under an unbearable weight. Vanessa's defense shifted from denial to anger to tearful pleas. Daniel, you can't believe this. They're trying to turn you against me. I love you. When Whitmore revealed the second mortgage taken out on their house, Daniel's expression hardened. There is no second mortgage. I would know about that. I'm afraid there is, Whitmore said gently, sliding the county records across the table. Your signature is right here, beside your wife's. Daniel examined the document, his face paling. This isn't my signature. It's forged. He looked up at Vanessa, betrayal etched in every line of his face. What did you do with that money? I needed it for investments, she said quickly. I was trying to secure our future, for the baby. What baby? I asked quietly, the question slicing through her excuses like a knife. You've been claiming pregnancy for weeks, but there are no physical signs, no doctor's appointments, until suddenly you invented one yesterday. Is there really a baby, Vanessa? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at his wife, waiting for a denial that didn't come. Instead, tears began streaming down her face, smearing her mascara. I was going to get pregnant, she whispered. I just needed some time to get our finances in order first. Daniel stood abruptly, pushing back from the table. Our finances? Is that what you call emptying our savings and forging my name on a mortgage? Where is the money, Vanessa? She flinched at his tone. Some of it went to pay off debts. The rest, investments. What investments? Daniel demanded. Overseas accounts, she admitted, her voice small. For our future. Whitmore cleared his throat. I believe what Mrs. Hale is describing may constitute wire fraud, which is a federal offense, not to mention the forgery of your signature on mortgage documents. The reality of her situation seemed to finally dawn on Vanessa. Her gaze darted around the room like a trapped animal's, finally settling on me. The naked hatred in her eyes was startling. You, she hissed. You couldn't just go quietly to a nursing home, could you? You had to ruin everything. No, Vanessa, I replied calmly. You ruined everything when you decided to steal from my son and hide my inheritance. Evelyn saw through you 15 years ago. She left safeguards in place, knowing someone like you might try to intercept her will. Evelyn? Vanessa looked confused. Your sister? What does she have to do with this? Everything, I said, nodding to Whitmore, who produced the final piece of evidence, Evelyn's letter. My sister was watching you long before you realized, gathering evidence, preparing for this very moment. As Whitmore read the letter aloud, the color drained from Vanessa's face. By the time he finished, she had sunk back into her chair, defeated. Daniel had moved to stand by the window, his back to the room, shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally turned, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry, his expression resolved. I want a divorce, he said simply, and I want to press charges for the forgery. Vanessa began to protest, but Whitmore raised a hand. Mrs. Hale, Vanessa, you are in a precarious legal position. Forgery, wire fraud, potential mail fraud for intercepting federal communications. These are serious charges that could result in significant prison time. He slid another document across the table. However, Mrs. Margaret Hale has authorized me to offer you an alternative. This agreement would require you to return all remaining funds from the second mortgage, dissolve your marriage to Daniel through uncontested divorce, make no claims on any Hale family assets, and sign a full confession of your actions to be held in escrow. In exchange, no criminal charges would be filed. Vanessa stared at the document, the fight visibly draining from her. And if I refuse, then we turn our evidence over to the authorities, Whitmore said simply. The choice is yours. The conference room fell silent as Vanessa weighed her options, her eyes moving from the agreement to Daniel's unyielding expression to the paralegal still typing in the corner, documenting every word. Finally, with trembling hands, she reached for a pen. The drive back to Burlington was silent, the tension in the car palpable. Vanessa sat in the back seat, as far from Daniel as the confined space would allow. The agreement she'd signed lay in Whitmore's office, her signature still wet on the paper that stripped her of ill-gotten gains and false identities. Daniel drove with mechanical precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Only once did he speak, about an hour into the journey. I need to understand, he said, his voice hollow. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me at all? Vanessa stared out the window at the passing winter landscape. Does it matter now? It matters to me, Daniel insisted, a crack in his stoic facade. She sighed, her breath fogging the cold window. In the beginning, maybe. You were kind, different from the others. The admission hung in the air between them, not the reassurance he'd hoped for, but perhaps the only honest thing she'd said in years. I sat quietly, letting them have this moment. The confrontation at Whitmore's office had been necessary, but brutal. The shock of learning about Vanessa's previous marriages, the forged mortgage, the intercepted inheritance notices, it had all hit Daniel like physical blows. Now came the aftershocks, the painful reassessment of 5 years of marriage built on lies. When we finally reached Burlington, the sky was darkening, snow beginning to fall in fat, lazy flakes. Daniel pulled into the driveway of what I now understood was a house drowning in debt. The second mortgage Vanessa had taken out by forging his signature had stripped away much of their equity. What happens now? Daniel asked as he turned off the engine, addressing neither of us in particular. Tonight, we rest, I said gently. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding. Vanessa's laugh was bitter. Just like that? Everyone gets a happy ending except me? You made your choices, I reminded her, keeping my voice level. Multiple times with multiple families. The agreement you signed is more merciful than you deserve. The terms Whitmore had outlined were straightforward. Vanessa would have 1 week to vacate the house, taking only personal belongings that could be verified as hers. She would transfer any remaining funds from the fraudulent mortgage back to Daniel, sign the uncontested divorce papers, and make no contact with either of us afterward. In exchange, we wouldn't press criminal charges that could have sent her to federal prison for years. Inside the house, Vanessa immediately retreated to the guest room, the master bedroom now tacitly ceded to Daniel. I made tea, the familiar ritual soothing my frayed nerves as Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. I'm an idiot, he said finally, accepting the steaming mug I placed before him. No, I countered, sitting across from him. You're a victim. There's a difference. 5 years, Mom. 5 years of marriage to someone who was just using me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. How did I not see it? Because she's very good at what she does, I said. She's had practice, and people like Vanessa target good people, kind people, because they're less likely to question or suspect. Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. When did you know? That something was wrong with her, I mean. I considered the question carefully. I always felt something was off. The way she isolated you from your friends, how she monitored your finances, her subtle undermining of our relationship. But I couldn't put it all together until Evelyn's letter and Mr. Whitmore's evidence. Aunt Evelyn. Daniel shook his head in wonder. I barely remember her, but she saved us from across time. She was always observant, I said, smiling at memories of my sharp-eyed sister. Even when we were children, nothing got past her. I just wish... I trailed off, the old regret surfacing. That you'd reconciled before she died, Daniel finished for me. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. 15 years lost that we can never get back. And now, because of Vanessa, 15 more years that I could have had financial security, could have kept our family home instead of selling it to pay your father's medical bills. Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm so sorry, Mom. About everything. About letting her push you out. About not standing up for you. I was weak. No, I squeezed his hand. You were manipulated by someone who's made a career of it. But now we have a chance to start over. How? He asked, the word heavy with despair. The house has almost no equity left. My credit is probably destroyed. My marriage was a lie. Well, I said, the ghost of a smile playing at my lips. It just so happens that I recently came into a substantial inheritance, including a beautiful farmhouse in New Hampshire with plenty of room for both of us if you want. For the first time since the revelations at Whitmore's office, Daniel's expression lightened. You'd still want me to live with you? After how I treated you? You're my son, I said simply. Nothing changes that. Besides, I've seen the place. It's too big for just me, and it comes with 20 acres and several outbuildings. Plenty of space for us to have privacy and still be family. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the occasional sound of Vanessa moving around in the guest room, packing her belongings, I thought about Evelyn's final gift. It wasn't just the money or the property, substantial as those were. It was this chance at redemption, at rebuilding what had been broken, not just between Daniel and me, but perhaps even healing the rift that had separated Evelyn and me in life. The next morning, I woke early and called Eleanor, filling her in on everything that had happened at Whitmore's office. Her reactions ranged from outrage at Vanessa's deception to delight at my newfound financial security. So when are you moving to New Hampshire? She asked finally. Soon, I said, looking out the window at the snow-covered yard. Daniel's coming with me, at least until he figures out his next steps. There's a lot to sort out here first. The house, the divorce, untangling all the financial mess Vanessa created. And what about you? Eleanor's voice softened. How are you holding up through all of this? I considered the question, searching for the right words to describe the tumult of emotions. I'm angry about the lost years and opportunities, sad about Evelyn, worried for Daniel, but also relieved, even hopeful. Hopeful, Eleanor repeated. I like that. After everything you've been through, you still have hope. Well, I said, I'm 71, not dead. There's still time for new beginnings. Over the next week, the house became a staging ground for separate futures. Vanessa packed methodically, her designer clothes and expensive shoes, filling suitcases that Daniel helped load into a taxi on her final day. Their goodbye was brief and cold, no embraces or tears, just a curt nod from Daniel as she climbed into the car that would take her to whatever life awaited beyond the one she'd fabricated with us. Meanwhile, Daniel and I sorted through our own belongings, deciding what to take to New Hampshire and what to leave behind. The house would need to be sold, the proceeds used to pay off as much of the mortgage debt as possible. Daniel had already spoken with a real estate agent who, despite the difficult market, thought we might break, even given the home's location. What will you do now? I asked him one evening as we sat in the living room, boxes half-packed around us. Career-wise, I mean. Daniel had taken a leave of absence from his accounting job, the stress of recent events making concentration impossible. I'm not sure, he admitted. I've been thinking about a complete change, actually. Maybe something outdoors, working with my hands. I nodded, remembering how he'd always loved helping his father in our garden as a child, how he'd built birdhouses and tree forts with meticulous attention to detail. The accounting career had been Vanessa's suggestion, a practical choice that had slowly drained his spirit. The property in New Hampshire has a large workshop, I reminded him. Your Aunt Evelyn apparently had plans to use it as a studio of some kind. It could be yours if you wanted. His eyes lit up at the possibility. Maybe woodworking. I've always wanted to try furniture making. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Whitmore's office, we made the move to New Hampshire. Eleanor drove up with us, helping transport the belongings we'd decided to keep. The farmhouse welcomed us with solid comfort, its rooms gradually filling with our combined possessions. My books and family photos, Daniel's tools and records, new furniture to replace what we'd left behind. Spring arrived with gentle persistence, melting snow revealing gardens that had been dormant but not dead. I discovered that Evelyn had been an avid gardener, the property boasting perennial beds, a small orchard, and a vegetable garden area that had gone wild in her absence but could be reclaimed. Daniel found purpose in the workshop, starting with small projects, shelves, cutting boards, a new kitchen table, and gradually working up to more complex pieces that began to sell at local craft fairs. The physical labor seemed to heal something in him. The focus required driving out ruminations about his failed marriage. By summer, we'd settled into a comfortable routine. I tended the gardens, preserving vegetables and fruits as they ripened, while Daniel worked in his shop. We shared meals, but respected each other's independence, a balance that would have been impossible in the cramped quarters of his Burlington house. One warm August evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow, Daniel broached a subject we'd both been avoiding. "I got the final divorce papers today," he said, swirling the lemonade in his glass. "It's officially over." "How do you feel?" I asked, watching his profile in the fading light. He considered for a moment. "Lighter. Like I've been carrying this weight for years without realizing it, and now it's gone." He turned to me. "Do you ever wonder where she is now? What she's doing?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not because I care about her well-being, but because I worry about whoever she might be targeting next." Daniel nodded slowly. "I looked her up online last week. Curiosity, I guess. And?" I tried to keep my tone neutral, though my pulse quickened with concern. "Nothing recent. Her social media accounts are all gone. It's like she's disappeared." We sat in silence for a while, contemplating what that might mean. Had Vanessa simply moved on to her next mark, or had our confrontation prompted some deeper change? It was impossible to know, and perhaps not our burden to carry. "I've been thinking," Daniel said finally, "about what to do with the property long term." "Oh?" I set down my glass, giving him my full attention. "Aunt Evelyn's will specified that the farm couldn't be sold, that it had to remain in the family or become a nonprofit, right?" I nodded. "That's right. Whitmore mentioned it during our first meeting." "What if we did both?" Daniel leaned forward, enthusiasm lighting his features. "What if we turned part of the property into a community resource? The main house could still be our home, but the guest cottage and barn could be something else." The idea caught my imagination immediately. "What did you have in mind?" "A center for families affected by financial fraud and manipulation," he said, the words coming faster as he warmed to the concept. "A place where people like us, like me, could get counseling, legal advice, financial planning help. We could partner with local services, maybe even work with law enforcement on education and prevention." I sat back, genuinely impressed. "Daniel, that's actually brilliant." "We have the resources now," he continued. "Your inheritance could fund the initial setup, and I've been researching grants for nonprofits. My accounting background would finally be useful for something good. A way to turn our experience into something positive," I mused, "to help others avoid what we went through." "Exactly." His smile was the most genuine I'd seen in months. "What do you think? Would Aunt Evelyn approve?" I thought about my sister, her foresight in protecting me even after her death, her apparent commitment to justice evidenced by the detailed file she'd compiled on Vanessa. "I think she'd love it. It honors her gift in the best possible way." The Evelyn Hale Center for Family Protection opened its doors the following spring. What began as a modest operation, weekend workshops in the converted barn, counseling sessions in the renovated guest cottage, gradually expanded as word spread. Daniel's experience as a victim gave him credibility with clients, while my teaching background proved useful in developing educational materials about recognizing manipulation and financial abuse. Local therapists volunteered their time, lawyers offered pro bono consultations, and financial advisors taught basics of money management to people rebuilding their lives after exploitation. The property that Evelyn had loved became a sanctuary for healing, its gardens and peaceful setting providing comfort to those in crisis. 2 years after our move to New Hampshire, on a crisp October afternoon, I was pruning roses near the guest cottage when a familiar figure approached along the gravel path. I straightened, my back protesting slightly at 73, and watched Vanessa walk toward me. She looked different, thinner, with simpler clothes and hair cut short in a practical style. None of the calculated glamour remained. I tensed, reaching for my phone in my pocket, ready to call for help if needed. "Mrs. Hale," she said, stopping several feet away. "Margaret, I'm not here to cause trouble. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my distance, garden shears still in hand. "I saw an article about the center," she explained, gesturing toward the barn where a workshop was currently underway. "About what you and Daniel are doing." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I've been getting help," she said, the words seeming to cost her effort. "Therapy. There are reasons, not excuses, but reasons, for why I became the person I was, why I did the things I did. And," I prompted when she paused, "and I wanted to see if there was any way I could contribute." She looked down at her hands, no longer manicured to perfection. "I know more about how people like me operate than anyone. I could help your clients recognize the warning signs." My instinct was to refuse immediately, to send her away from the peaceful life Daniel and I had built. But something stopped me, perhaps the genuine uncertainty in her posture, so different from the calculated confidence she'd once projected. "That would be Daniel's decision," I said finally, "and he's not here today." "I understand." She nodded, turning to leave. It was just a thought. "Vanessa," I called after her. She paused, looking back. "Why the change, really?" She considered the question, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "When everything fell apart, when I had nothing and no one left, I had to face myself for the first time. It wasn't pretty." A rueful smile touched her lips. "I'm trying to be someone different now, someone my mother would have been proud of." I studied her, searching for signs of the old manipulation, the practiced sincerity she'd once perfected. But all I saw was a tired woman in her 40s, attempting something genuinely difficult. "Change. Come back next Tuesday," I said finally. "Daniel will be here then. I make no promises about his response." "Thank you," she said simply, and walked away. I watched her go, feeling not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin, understanding. People were capable of terrible things, as Vanessa had proven, but they were also capable of redemption, of growth, of transformation. Evelyn had seen that truth 15 years ago when she arranged her posthumous protection. She'd recognized the danger Vanessa posed, but she'd also created a safety net that ultimately served not just to shield me financially, but to restore a family broken by manipulation and lies. As I returned to my roses, I thought about how life's hardest moments could become foundations for something new. Daniel and I had taken our pain and built a place of healing. Perhaps Vanessa, in her own way, was attempting the same. When Daniel returned that evening, I told him about Vanessa's visit. His initial reaction was anger, followed by wary curiosity. "Do you believe her?" he asked, as we sat in the kitchen, sharing the soup I'd made for dinner. "That she's changed?" "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "But I believe in the possibility of change. And if she has insights that could help others, wouldn't it be wrong to turn that away?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll meet with her. No promises beyond that." That meeting led to another, and eventually to Vanessa joining the center as a part-time speaker, sharing her perspective as a former manipulator with clients and professionals alike. Her presence was controversial at first, but her unvarnished honesty about her past actions and thought processes proved invaluable to our work. Over time, a cautious working relationship developed. Not friendship, not forgiveness exactly, but a shared commitment to preventing others from experiencing what we had endured. Daniel remained careful around her, professional, but distant. I found my own feelings evolving from bitter resentment to a complicated respect for the difficult path of atonement she seemed genuinely committed to walking. 5 years after our move to New Hampshire, the Evelyn Hale Center had helped hundreds of families recognize, escape, and recover from situations similar to what Daniel and I had experienced. The property that had once been my sister's private sanctuary had become a community resource, alive with purpose and healing. On what would have been Evelyn's 77th birthday, I stood alone in the garden she'd planted, now restored and flourishing under my care. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, roses climbed trellises she'd installed decades earlier, and herbs scented the air as I brushed past them. "You were right," I said aloud, imagining my sister walking beside me as she might have in another life, one where we'd mended our relationship before it was too late. About everything. About Vanessa. About protecting your assets. About keeping the farm in the family. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, almost like a response. "We've made something good here," I continued. "Something that matters. I think you'd be proud." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gardens Evelyn had loved, I felt a sense of completion. The pain of being cast out of my son's home had led to this new beginning. The sister I'd lost had protected me from beyond the grave. The manipulation that had nearly destroyed our family had instead become the foundation for helping others. At 76, I had found not just security, but purpose. Not just a house, but a true home. Not just reconciliation with my son, but a deeper understanding of resilience and forgiveness. And perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that it's never too late for a new chapter to begin. If my story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences from women who refuse to be silenced. Your support means everything to those of us who've found strength in our most vulnerable moments.